My name is Timothy Williams, and I work at the International Water Management Institute. The day is long spent, but I believe that this panel is going to energize us and allow us to be able to put into perspectives many of the things we've discussed over the last 2 days or so. The presentations we've heard today and the discussion of the last panel, as well as the discussion of the last 2 days, I think have re-emphasized 2 very important points. The first is imperative, the development imperative of small-scale irrigation. And what do I mean by that? In a continent where 1 in every 4 person is undernourished or malnourished, where 70% of the rural population is made up of smallholder farmers, small-scale irrigation is a vehicle to bring about a change in the livelihoods as well as in the economic opportunities open to people. That was made clear by the presentation this morning. And the second imperative, or the second point that I've come out quite clearly, is that small-scale irrigation is a business. We've been told repeatedly it is profitable and that it could be a vehicle or a game changer that can bring about prosperity to the rural sector, not only in terms of agricultural production, but also in terms of the spillover effect to the non-farm sector in many of our African countries. So if indeed small-scale irrigation is development-oriented, if it is economically profitable, and if the potential is there, then the question then is, how do we turn this potential into reality? I think it was Dr. Norman Borlaug who said nobody eats potential. And certainly, potential is not what we need in Africa. What we need is to turn the potential of small-scale irrigation into a reality and bring about a change, both in terms of satisfying or meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as bringing about a change on the continent. And this afternoon, we've gathered together a distinguished panel of very senior people in various governments in Africa. Many of them are direct advisors to their ministers and to cabinets. And we are really very fortunate indeed to have them give us their perspective on what would be the steps needed to turn this potential that we've been discussing over the last 3 days into reality, and in particular, in being able to lift millions of smallholder farmers out of poverty in Africa. What I'll then do initially is to ask them very briefly, in not more than 3 sentences, introduce yourself, your country, your position, as well as your, if you like, affinity and work related to small-scale irrigation in your various countries. And then I will, once that introduction is over, I will read out to you the rules of the game, which I will strictly enforce. If you could start, Ben, at the end of the table.
Yeah, my name is Ben Nyamadi. I work with Ghana Irrigation Development Authority as the Chief Executive Officer. And my affinity for small-scale irrigation shows that we are already there with our policy. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Getachew Gebru. I come from Ethiopia. I am a member of the External Advisory Committee and also serving as the president of the Ethiopian Society of Animal Production. So as you can hear, I come from the livestock perspective, trying to look into the potential of small-scale irrigation, addressing issues around livestock and livestock feeding. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Like all the previous speakers, I'm going to break the rules of 3 sentences. I'm Evelyn Nambiru Maura. I come from Kenya. I work currently as a strategy and policy manager at an organization called the African Academy of Sciences. I have over 15 years of experience in agricultural development. Currently, I'm the chair of the External Advisory Board for ILSSI, but also the vice president of the Association of Agricultural Economics, the African Association of Agricultural Economics. So I have a great passion for issues to do with agriculture, gender, irrigation, etc.
Good afternoon. My name is Mbogo Futakamba. I'm the retired permanent secretary, Minister of Water and Irrigation, and I've been in the sector for quite some time. I've been the Minister of Agriculture, and also I've been also in the Ministry of Water and Irrigation as a presidential appointee. And currently now, I'm the ambassador of Tanzania Water Partnership and the chair of National Multisectoral Use on Water Management. Irrigation is my passion.
Good afternoon. My name is Raymond January Kayombe. I work with the Minister of Agriculture, Tanzania, and the position I held is the National Program Coordinator of the Agricultural Sector Development. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All the panelists broke the first rule, so that means I need to wield the whip to make sure that we stick to time. Without much further ado, let me start with Raymond. Raymond, you are the National Coordinator of the Agricultural Sector Development Program in Tanzania. This program has gone into its second phase. That means it's been very successful in meeting some of the goals set for its establishment. I also happen to be very familiar with the Agricultural Sector Development Program in Tanzania, and one of the 7 thematic areas of that sector strategy is on irrigation development. Can you tell us or provide us with one concrete example of the way in which small-scale irrigation is being promoted as part of this agricultural development strategy in Tanzania? Each speaker will have about 5 to 7 minutes to respond, and I will encourage you, if any of the panelists pick up on a point that you would like to comment on, you're free to do that, but make sure you do it within the time allocated to you.
I still have 5 minutes?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, you are right, to the team. Yes, we have had the Agriculture Sector Development Program Phase 1, which was completed in 2015. Now we have a new program. This is Phase 2, the first program, which is about to begin. It has not started, but we have concluded everything, and the government has approved it. So we are now about to start this year. We had challenges in the Phase 1 of the program, but there were also achievements and good lessons from that program. And those ones actually we actually uplifted to the design of the new program, which is Phase 2. Now, the difference between the first program and this program is that the other phase in this phase 2, is that we are getting more focused on the communities we'll be addressing. So we have chosen a number of communities which we think we can be able to work on within the time frame of 5 years for the program. But the another dimension is putting the private sector at the forefront of driving this program. So this is a major shift from what we are, the way we implement the first program and this program. Now, this program puts the smallholder farmer on the forefront. How? The program has 4 components. The first component is about sustainable water and land use management. And within that, we have the irrigation development. And within the irrigation development, we are targeting the smallholder farmer, without leaving, of course, other farmers, the medium and large-scale farmers, but the major focus on the smallholder farmer. And in Tanzania, their culture sector is led by the smallholder farmers. If you look at the numbers, the potential for agriculture in Tanzania is around 40 million hectares. Out of that, 29 million hectares is potential for irrigation. The developed irrigation to date is 408,333 hectares. Within that, the smallholder is almost covering 400,000 hectares. So you can see from agriculture itself, when it comes to irrigation, is very much dominated by smallholder farmers. So now, the way we are going to work with the smallholder farmers, that we recognize the smallholder farmer is there, he has a role to play, or he or her has a role to play, but also the private sector has a role to play in this, because we are looking at this as commodity value chain. So we want to include not only farmers, not only private sector, the government, development partners, financial institutions, the private sector, even the farmers, the private sector, but we are looking at it in a different way. So that we have a chain now from supply of inputs, for what to do on the field. That means include mechanization services. Then we go out to the provision of storage facilities, processing, all the way to the market. So we think with this approach, we'll be able to make the farmers realize what they are doing, and that they get profit, be able to address the issues of food security and nutrition, not food security alone, food security, food and nutrition security, but also income to be able to address the issues regarding the better lives out of agriculture.
Thank you very much. I think that's very clear that in order to be able to expand both the area as well as achieve the objectives of the ASDP, you really need to focus on smallholder farmers. Let me move on to Mbogo Futakamba. You have a long-standing association with water management and irrigation in Tanzania. And you've been a long-standing advocate of small-scale irrigation. Looking back over your career, what will you consider to be the 2 main obstacles to sustainable growth of small-scale irrigation in Tanzania? And how do you think those obstacles can be removed?
Okay, thank you. Maybe to add on what my colleague have added, is that actually Tanzania is full sufficient in food by 125%. And when you look into that full self-sufficiency, is that 25% of the food production in Tanzania comes from smallholder farmers, and which is about a coverage of 400,000+ hectares. So you can really see the importance of smallholder farmers. As the moderator have said, it's true I have really a long experience in that. Maybe there are many issues which I can say have been an obstacle to which the smallholder farmers have not fared very well. But maybe quickly let me mention 2. The first one, which I find that is really prevailing strongly, is the inadequate involvement and support by the government to small-scale irrigation undertakings. And when I say this, I mean that total commitment and total support. And when I say total support for the government, means the appropriate and affordable support to infrastructure development, which at the end of the day will pave a way for better water management and they finally improve water use efficiency. But there are issues on training, there are issues on promoting the strong linkage between research institutes and universities, irrigation technicians and extension officers, and another private sector, the farmer. This tripartite is not well promoted, but also putting deliberately the policy frameworks which will give advantage to smallholder farmers, especially on the area which you all have mentioned, the area of subsidy, because giving subsidy is not a crime, but also to look into practical and the conducive policies which will sensitize the private sector apart from the farmers. But lastly, the continuity of financing in all the projects which we are having, because the challenge we have had is that there is no continuity. But secondly, another obstacle we have mentioned the government is now the slow pace by the private sector to invest in small-scale irrigation projects. And we are all, it has been shared to us, they are having fear of not realizing what they invest. They are afraid of natural calamities, but also there are some rigorous procedures in getting loan in case they don't see anything on the ground. But it was good, our colleague, when he was doing presentation, he invested, that's why he got more loans. But also to the private sector, lack of knowledge and understanding of the benefits and of being involved into irrigation, and even also issues pertaining what we call crop insurance. Some of the private sector are not aware of that. So these are the rigorous areas which I find really that I've been struggling, and I will keep on struggling because now I have the chair as chair of multi-sectoral on the water use for my nation. Maybe we'll rub shoulders with the political figures to address these things. And then I'll be able to address what should be done as facilitator of sales. So I've just mentioned those two critical, there are many, but those are two critical obstacles which I've experienced that they are not giving a leeway for smallholder farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mbogo. Let me move on to Evelyn. As an experienced policy analyst, what advice will you give, say, to a government minister in Uganda on what to do and how to go about promoting small-scale irrigation in Uganda?
Thank you, Tim. First, I believe I'll tell him not to panic, that there is hope. And I'll tell him to get informed. I believe that many policymakers on our continent make decisions without really getting good information to inform the policy decisions. I believe that understanding the problem of in the country is very important. Where do you need to irrigate? How much do you need to irrigate? Why do you need to irrigate? How are you going to fund the irrigation that needs to take place on the continent? I was talking to a colleague yesterday who told me something that in their country, the policy they have is one dam, one village. The question is, do all the villages need the dams? Can all the villages sustain the dams? And can the environment sustain the dams? So being informed is very important, and that's why I like this ILSSI project. It's providing critical information on the implications of smallholder farmers irrigating, on what needs to be done, on where irrigation needs to be done. So being informed is what I would tell him to do first. And then I would also tell him to, once they understand the problem, to use the information they have to decide on what scale they need to empower people to irrigate. For example, at small scale level, irrigation would, supporting farmers in the irrigation agenda would really increase efficiency of water use. And yet at ecosystem level or regional level, you might find that there's more efficiency in allocation of the resources. I would then tell him, like we've had, or her, from many meetings that we've had since Monday, that he needs to address the issues of institutions or regulations within the country. You'll find that enforcement is very poor. Who will enforce issues of overuse of water? The government itself, many times, cannot actually enforce small-scale irrigation. And that's why I believe that we need to really promote collective action. I worked with a guru, my advisor, dissertation advisor was Elina Ostrom, who was the first female Nobel laureate in economics. And he studied issues of institutions and issues of governance in irrigation, natural resources. And one thing she really pushed forward, and I believe is what we need in countries like Uganda, Kenya, or in African countries, is to encourage the local people to govern their resources and yet avoid the tragedy of the commons. Yesterday, I was shocked when one of the presenters said that collective action wasn't working, or governing the commons wasn't working in India. One of the things that came to my mind was that did they know that the commons can be successful, or governing the commons can be successful, if you have certain principles that you need to put in place. So I would encourage the minister to indeed encourage collective action, encourage common pool resource management, but ensure that the certain principles are in place, ensuring there are clear boundaries, involving the local people in making of the rules. Bylaws are very important in governance of these resources. Ensure that there is graduated sanctions. If someone uses water by more than 1 liter, should they be punished to the same level as the person who has diverted the river into their fields? So you would need to ensure that these graduated sanctions actually enable or encourage proper and efficient use of water. How many more minutes do I have?
Finish your time.
So I also think that it's very important to have the gender lens. This has been mentioned so many times, but really, if you don't support women or youth or the vulnerable in communities, you're not going to take advantages of the resources that are available. Many times in these local rural places, the women actually are the ones responsible for feeding the homes. So if they are not empowered to have access to these resources, how would you be able to ensure that there is sustainable irrigation and you realize the full potential? I could go on and on, like I said, but I don't want to go on and on because I'm sure it's really time. But also having the proper economic instruments is important. People have talked a lot about subsidies, but it's important to note that subsidies do not always work in rural settings. Many times it's the rich farmers that take advantages of these subsidies, so they need to be targeted properly and crafted in a way that would benefit the target group that you have in mind. Infrastructure, of course, capacity building, both for the local people, but also for the policymakers and the governments. In conclusion, I think it's very important to plan and have proper policies in place and not do policy by crisis.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very good point. Not policy by crisis, but well-informed policies. Evelyn is the vice president of my professional association, and that's why I've been very lenient with otherwise I will be proscribed from the association. Let's move on. Getachew, you're an animal scientist.
Yeah.
And we've heard repeatedly today that small-scale irrigation could be a link between crop production and livestock production. For instance, through fodder production, and so on and so forth. But the situation in Africa is not many small-scale farmers are taking advantage of this link. Why is that? And what can be done to give them the incentive to be able to make this link between crop and livestock production through the medium of small-scale irrigation?
Thank you, Tim. I think, for me, as a livestock person, in the last couple of days and even today, I was really happy to see livestock, fodder, being considered as important components in the small-scale irrigation scheme. I think this has been there way before we were discussing about this as far as the small-scale farmers or the agro-pastoralists are concerned. It dates back to 10 years ago, Mr. Moderator. I was in part of Somali region in Ethiopia, and very surprisingly and impressed with a very strong linkage of irrigation serving as a bridge between livestock keepers and those who are actually producing maize irrigated. I was seeing loads of donkeys every day going to market. And the livestock keepers were buying the maize, green maize plant, and they were feeding these to stanchion animals kept at home, close to about 3,000 of them in a place called Doloado. It's really a far place. But I was really impressed, and that kind of gave me the light that one day this issue is going to be also picked up at a greater length, considering the experience of these ones. I went to parts of, in Somali region of Ethiopia, I went to a place called Gode. Very impressed to see how the forage producers on the side of the Wabi Shabele River had forged a partnership through the small-scale irrigation with camel producers who were far away but had to come close to town to get forage and to be able to get access to sell milk. So the way I see this perspective is the fact that, as Evelyn was saying, there is a lot of hope. And I am seeing that we're not only talking about food security today, but we're also talking about feed security. And in many of the nations, especially in the case of Ethiopia, there is now a very strong move towards higher integration of crop and livestock, but also more importantly, to kind of bring in change even in the productivity of the animals, not in number, per head of livestock. And considering the projection of feed, for example, in Ethiopia, by 2028, Ethiopia will not be able to feed the livestock and maintain the productivity unless additional sources of getting feed comes on board. And the only way we would be able to fill up that is, hopefully, the way I see it, is to exploit that bridge of small-scale irrigation. And there are potentials for that. There are drivers for small irrigation now because of the ongoing artificial insemination programs, because of the ongoing breed improvements, because improved breeds of dairy are there. So farmers are now moving to not only a zero-input livestock production, but a livestock production that does bring contribution into household income, that does bring or assure feed security. So these are, I think, aspects that we have to look into as we move forward in trying to incorporate or bridge the relationship of crop and livestock and use that bridge to be the small-scale irrigation. But as rightly said, there are, of course, constraints here and there that needs to be addressed to be able to move to the aspired objectives. I would like to mention a few things here, in just things that I feel from my own experience, why farmers are not taking advantage. There are those who are innovative enough, the kind of the positive deviants who have already moved without even any support from research and otherwise to be able to cater to the needs of, as far as feed is concerned, and better use of small-scale irrigation. But there is a huge majority that is not in that boat. And I think one important point that I would like to mention here is there is one of the reasons could be the lack of community engagement in the selection itself of the irrigation technologies. So once we lose the ground, it will be very hard to regain it. And this needs to be emphasized very much. And in as much also there is a lack of understanding of the process required to involve communities. Even we can come with the interventions, but if we are not really clearly understanding the process of how to involve the communities, that may not be the right way to move. And ineffective targeting, which is mostly the case. Now, let me just briefly mention what is needed really now to encourage them to make the necessary investment in small-scale irrigation. I think the first and important thing, the way I see it, there must be a driver to small-scale irrigation. One of the drivers that is happening now is the commercialization or the market orientation of livestock production. This by itself is a way that helps drive the need for an effective and efficient utilization of small-scale irrigation, because we know that given the current situation, there is no way that we'll be able to meet this with the rain-fed agriculture. And there is, to me, a very strong need for evidence-based prioritization of investment in small-scale irrigation. Looking at the various facets of interventions, be it, it could be like forage, could be, as was being presented today, could be used on farm, but forage could also be a cash crop. And this is coming up. In fact, there is now an emerging attraction in Ethiopia where forage seeds are becoming very critical. Some farmers and some private entrepreneurs are actually going into forage seeds. And it's not only about the domestic need, but there is also an export need for this. So there is that potential of moving forward in trying to strengthen of what we know, identifying the right technology, and moving forward. And in so doing, we'd be able to capture a lot of opportunities. And of course, there is also a need to create market linkages, which is really a problem. There are cases even in Ethiopia where, you know, even as close as some of you who know Adama, which is about 100 and something kilometers from Addis, and then you drive another 80 kilometers, you go to a place called Matahara, where there is a very good irrigation going on for cash crop. But sometimes it's very difficult to get the connection to market. And some of this, once produced, are wasted. So there is a need of working on linkages to market. There is also a need to be able to ensure government's commitment at the initial phase to support this small-scale irrigation. And there is also a need for institutionalizing this small irrigation into the appropriate line ministries. I think this is a missing link. I don't know in other countries as well, but this is really a missing link. In the development of the livestock master plan in Ethiopia, where I was involved as one of the members, we, looking back, have not really looked enough into the details of how to incorporate small-scale irrigation in addressing the feed deficit that's coming up in 2028. So there are areas where we really need to ensure that these appropriate strategies and plans are already in place, and line ministries are aware of it. And in fact, some of the packages that are coming out from the ILSSI project, like the decision support system, some of the works that have been done in terms of prioritizing the kind of technologies, some of the mappings that we have seen today, like the suitability of land for irrigation. You know, I wonder how much of these have really gone into the line ministries that are responsible to carry this task forward and address the issue of poverty, issue of food security, and feed security as well. So there is a very strong need for building capacity of various institutions. It is already happening. We're not starting from zero ground, but I think there is more. The urgency is much more today than was before. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say... 30
seconds.
Yeah, I just want to say... I just want to say that, you know, these small-scale initiatives of irrigation must take into account livelihood strategies outside the irrigated context, as well as multiple demands on irrigated water, and there must be a sense of ownership by the farmers. And I know that there are a lot of ongoing positive activities that we have observed, which have emerged as a result of this pioneer activity with the ILSSI project. But I hope there will be an opportunity to capture those and be able to move forward and ensure that we have really gone one more step to be able to ensure food security as well as food security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Getachew. I think the ILSSI project has an ambassador here in terms of linking crop and livestock production, and your passion actually, shines through your contribution. Now let me move on to Ben.
Yeah.
Ben, the organization that you lead, which is the Ghana Irrigation Development Authority, focuses on large-scale public sector irrigation. And there's always a tension between large-scale irrigation in Africa and small-scale irrigation. My question to you is, in what ways is your organization, as an example of similar organization across Africa, are looking into making small-scale irrigation a complementary adjunct to the large-scale systems that you run? Is this something you're already involved in, or you're planning to get involved in? How do you plan to make the two complementary?
Thank you, moderator. In my introduction, I say we are already there.
Okay.
Why I said that is that in 2006, when we had an national irrigation policy, which was led by Ghana Irrigation Development Authority with assistance from IMI and FAO. The objective was promoting large-scale irrigation with some additional small-scale. But thereafter, the implementation plan preparation brought us into a pre-investment framework, which came up with looking at the stock that has been taken, realized that government cannot keep pace with the development that the small-scale irrigation has already gone into. So what do? We had to quickly review the policy to be in line with what the people are already doing. So the reviewed policy took into account the large scale, the community managed, the small scale, micro enhanced rain-fed agriculture, and then market orientation of PPP. We were surprised, not surprised, we were there with our planning for the large scale. Then the donor community came and said, oh, PPP, that is the bullet, the silver bullet. So what do? In this review policy, we have put in sector-specific PPP, that is PPP specific to irrigation development. So that is how far we've gone. Now, looking at the PPP side, we had some hindsight. The World Bank gave 100 million for viability gap funding. For 5 years, no institution or no firm has ever come up to pick this viability gap in order to go through the process of coming up with a PPP project. So I think we had a meeting in Ethiopia, and then we agreed that once there is no PPP, we should promote a study into PPP, which is led by Ruth. We are yet to get what will be the framework to be applied in that aspect of the PPP. So I can say that this particular policy for which we are looking at now is to remove binding constraints that would leapfrog the small-scale irrigation development. Binding constraints having the laws or the regulations in place. So Irrigation Development Authority will be looking at more of a regulation than becoming a sector implementer or manager. So because there is so much small-scale irrigation that will come, as the trend is going, there will be more and more and more. But what do we do? Do we leave them to just do whatever they want to do? No, that cannot be. So there is also in the review the laws and the regulations that we intend to use to guide the development of this small-scale irrigation. I think the upscaling of small-scale irrigation is what the key issue is. We are looking at the implementation of the solar irrigation. Why are we looking at solar irrigation? Most of the small-scale irrigation practitioners came from bucket, and when there is rural electrification, then there was a boom. People could buy electric motor pumps, fix anywhere, and start producing through shallow groundwater. But the electricity tariff has become so exorbitant that now their profit margin is getting down gradually. And so they are crying out to government, what can you do for us? Because Egypt pay about 0.3 of dollar cents per kilowatt, while Ghana pay about 17.17. So you can see the margin for which the people are losing their profit. So this year, for example, government has devoted some funds to get the conversion of this. The people already are developing the motor pumps, they can repair them, and it is free. So what do? They are in need of just to lower tariff. So how do we lower the tariff for them? Is to promote the solar. And this promotion is starting this year. So if this one goes on, then we believe more and more small-scale irrigation will take place. Nico's presentation shows somebody with a motorbike, with a motorized behind a bicycle. That is the other aspect within the forest region, where they go around either hiring or going to do their own farm in the forest region, where they pump from surface water and irrigate along the line. When you go to the north, I made a joke all the time and said, there are some places, if you dig a hole and you leave it, the next day you come, you see somebody fetching the water to water crops. But there are areas that you can dig several holes, nobody will mind you. Those are the areas where the ILSSI project went into, where any available water that they see, they are ready to utilize it. That is the upper East region where ILSSI project worked. So the ILSSI project worked at a place where the people are already there. I would have thought that they could do the other side, where to see what it would take for those people to also be attracted to just the next neighbors, so that what we are looking for is how do we expand the small-scale irrigation which the people themselves are already in. So I would urge, maybe if they have the second phase, they should be looking at the other side to come out with the concrete reasons what would promote the other side for. Although we have some of them doing something, but to the level of the other side for which the region where they studied, that would also be good for us. Let me finish by looking at the PPP aspect again. The large-scale irrigation had overcapacity because most of them are supply-led. So farmers are not interested in a way. So government invited people, the large-scale growers, like Compagnie Fruitière, etc., to come and have a stake. When they came, they said, oh, we are going to grow banana. And banana is an enclave. Nobody can grow banana with us. So they went in. One of them is about 2,000 hectares of banana is growing. But the small-scale farmers who are around there have no stake in what they are doing. So what did we do? We look at it and then we rush a case to Parliament that from now on, if you come and you are going to use the national asset to produce your crop, you have to give a stake of 30% to the local farmers who would produce for you and you have a buyback arrangement with them. A group came and said, no, we cannot have that. Okay, if you cannot have people to grow banana for you, then what do we do? They said, okay, we'll invest in giving them rice. So you produce rice, and then we'll get somebody to buy the rice from you. So those are some of the ways that we try to control these international organizations who come in and want to, I won't say cheat, but want to look at the ignorance part of the law. If the law is not there, then they want to tread on that and make the best out of it for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've had a very rich discussion and description of what needs to be done to turn the potential into reality. We touched on the right policies, the use of solar irrigation as an incentive. We looked at the role of government, and most importantly, the commercialization of opportunities of products that can really act as the incentive and the spur to attract investment into small-scale irrigation. I won't ask you, because we're already a little bit over time, but since we are already entering into discussion, if you have one final word you want to say about this exciting topic. We all agreed we can turn the potential into reality. If you have just one burning word you want to say about whether it's doable or not doable, and the time scale, you can say that. Raymond?
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Very briefly.
Very brief. Yes. I just call upon partners and collaborators to join hands in taking this initiative forward. We are seeing our smallholder farmers. We want to transform them. We want to transform agriculture, but we want also to have partners. As I've said, private sector is key in supporting this move, but also others as well. Financial institutions are very important because now the government cannot offer everything. We also need to have the farmers who have benefited from this to be able to reach the financial institutions, also contribute to their development. In sowing, we are hoping that in 5 years to come, we have transformed agriculture within our country, because this one is focusing on crops, livestock, and fisheries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Also, as I commented previously, that the government needs to adapt policies which will be attractive to bring investment in these smallholder irrigation schemes, and especially when we talk of subsidy. But also, as we have heard about the value chain, that should be looked into so that the smallholder farmers will be able to accrue some profits. But on top of that, moderator, we need to support the formulation of water users and guide these water users associations so that they'll be able to undertake a proper water management and utilization. And as we have done in ILSSI, as my colleagues have said, let's promote this tripartite work, the research, development on various technologies, that is, have a proper infrastructure, issues on water management, supply, and also work with other institutions, especially when we talk about having varieties which are crop resistant, but also the methodology. Yesterday, we had the system rice intensification. Let our smallholder farmers be given to those areas. But lastly, we have communication. Communication with smallholders so that they'll know that they have the part and parcel on issues pertaining to irrigation equipment, innovations, and advisory services. If we do that, and also have our practical programs. Yesterday, my colleague was joking me that we are producing maps with resolution and other things, which are really not to reach up to the farmers. So my last word is that let's have a practical program which will be easily translated by our farmers on issues pertaining to climate change, adversity, and resilience. Sorry, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Evelyn, just one word.
Yes, just one more point that hasn't been mentioned on this panel is the issue of land tenure. I believe for small-scale holder farmers, unless the land tenure issues are addressed, irrigation will take a long time to become reality.
Thank you. Gatachi.
I think just to
It's fine, yeah.
Okay, just to follow up on, I think on the tenure issue, it's more amplified when it comes to a bigger scale of fodder production, for example, and getting land allocated for that purpose. For example, the situation in Ethiopia is you can readily get land for other purposes, for other investment, than asking land to do forage and fodder cultivation. So this kind of a land allocation and change in the policy and practices would be vital element to move forward.
Yeah, once we are here as a research forum, I would urge the researchers to involve the end users more than anything, because I have realized in some of the researches that they are doing in the northern Ghana, they come from nowhere and they start doing their research, and at the end of the day, they claim they have made progress or they have succeeded. But when they go, that is the end of the success. But they should be more interactive with the end users, so that at the end of the day, when the project closes, it can be taken up. Thank you.
Please join me in giving a round of applause to the panelists for a job well done.